Alrighty, let's get started. Next up we have Todd Kennedy, and he's going to talk a little bit about making hiring better.
Hi. So I'm going to talk about hiring because it's something we all have to deal with in one end or another. Because to get jobs, we all have to get hired, and then frequently when we have those jobs, we have to help hire new people to work with us. So it's something that touches us all. I'm the CTO of a very small startup called Scripto. We make software for writing television shows. And quick disclaimer, all of this is anecdotal. I've never run an A/B test or, gone into deep psychology about how hiring works and how hiring should work. And can you even A/B test interviewing? I mean, let's stop disrupting things for a second and think about it. So like our good friend Lionel Hutz here, I have a lot of hearsay and conjecture, and those are kinds of evidence. But I have no quantifiable oh, if you do this every single time, you get the same result. So bear with me, and I'm happy to talk to you about this on Twitter or in person or anything afterwards. And this slide's from Max, but he's not here, unfortunately. So who's here ever walked into an interview and been told to write code on a whiteboard? Oh, that's such a disappointing number of hands. There's a lot of problems with that in and of itself. The first one being that who here writes code on a whiteboard for a job? For a living, as part of their actual job? No one. Okay, cool. If you were interviewing to be a chef, for example, and you walked into a restaurant and someone was like, hey, so we want you to make an omelet, and here is some flour, and there's no stove over there, but there's some pans. Yeah, I'm waiting. And it's kind of like a similar thing. You're asking someone to replicate a scenario that doesn't actually exist in the course of employment. And it's not very helpful for anyone involved. You don't get a lot of good answers out of it, and it generally throws the people off who you're interviewing. Or we come across a thing like this, and we got a job posting here, and it's we're looking for someone front-end developer, jQuery backbone SaaS. This slide was written a while ago. It's got a backbone in it. Sorry. I should probably say React at this point. jQuery should be gone. There's probably something other than SaaS out there at this point. I don't really know. But you get into the interview, and the guy gives you a piece of paper, and this is written on it. And you're like, what the fuck is this? I don't even know what... Front-end engineer? I write JavaScript in SaaS with a struct. Jesus Christ. And you're like, fine, what? And you look at the person, and you're like, So this has actually happened to me. So I interviewed at one point for OkCupid Labs for a front-end position. And I got asked, not this specifically, but this was part of the interview. Thankfully, I took computer science 101, so whatever. But then they asked me write some search algorithm in C. I haven't written C since 1996. I'm dating myself here a little. That's when I started college. And I just laughed, and I literally thanked the interviewer first time and walked out of the interview. Because it's C, the browser doesn't run C. Stop. It's just come on, let's bring things back to reality here. So the question is can we do better than this? And we can. We know we can. But more importantly, we should. Which is that's the thing is everyone knows we can interview better than this. But we really should. And then the question inevitably ends up with why. So you're at some job. So I've worked at a couple of very large corporate positions before. Sorry, Virginia. And I found all of them in the interview perspective would be horrible. Because no one's interested in fixing interviewing there because you work for a large company. And they're like, well, everyone wants to work for us. So we're going to be a really tough interviewer and we're going to make sure we get the important people. But the problem with that is that you end up with a lot of self-selected people who end up in your organization. And your organization then lacks in diversity. And the important part about diversity is when you've got more diversity, you've got more viewpoints. When you've got more viewpoints, you've got a wider set of solutions to a problem. When you've got more solutions, you can actually choose the one that works rather than the one you have. So one of the problems, I've been in a lot of teams, a lot of people look at me, have my experience. And we generally arrive at a similar sort of consensus for how to solve a problem. That consensus doesn't always turn out to be the good one. just because we have a similar set of experience and a similar set of, sort of understanding of code and understanding of life. And it's like, it doesn't tend to lead to necessarily the best solution available for any given problem. So we're gonna diverge into history for a second here, and we're gonna talk about what New York City and Rome have in common. And the big thing is that both of them were founded on the principle of, and I'm gonna couch this very, very heavily, because they were not inclusive societies, but they were way more inclusive than the societies that existed at the times that they were founded. Rome had the concept of a path to citizenship, even for slaves, which tell the Etruscans that or the Gauls that, and they're like, yeah, whatever, dude, and then they get conquered. And then New York City, founded by the Dutch originally, is New Amsterdam, and the Dutch were really more interested in making money than anything else. So unlike their puritanical neighbors to New England, they let Jews in, which was no one let them in any colony in America. But they were like, hey, you're gonna help us make money, great. Anyway, these two cities have become very large. We still talk about these cities as being very important places because they actually were more diverse than the cities that existed at the times that they sort of were founded and were growing into prominence. And so this sort of backs up that whole concept because sometimes people look and you're like, well, diversity doesn't really matter. And you're like, it really does. And then we got some actual quote here from someone who works for Nielsen. Thank you. I'm trying to remember that. That link leads to a Nielsen report. Is that better? Okay. And this is that workplaces that are perceived as diverse have the highest levels of employee engagement. So it turns out that diversity is not also really good for solving your problems, but it's also really good for making your employees really want to be there, which is a cool concept to think about. So the question is then, why do we use these approaches that don't lead to sort of these job environments that we want to be in? And part of the answer is that a lot of people say, I want to see how people operate under stress. So I worked for a while at a startup, and they would ask questions that were just ridiculous, completely non sequiturs, to kind of surprise the candidate into oh, now think quick. And they were really shitty questions. And it made people really uncomfortable, and people would stammer at their response. And it's if that's how you're going to work with me, I don't want to work with you. Am I going to be writing code one day and you're going to go over and be like, quick question, how does this work? And I'm like, oh, fuck you. I'm writing code. Leave me alone. I don't want to operate under stress. So I don't want to see how people operate under stress because that's not a healthy work environment in the first place. And in the second place, you're not going to get a good answer out of the person because they're going to be sweating it and trying to figure out oh my god, I need this job, I need to pay my rent, whatever you want to hear. And part of it is also there's the rite of passage exclusivity. When I interviewed here, I had to do this too. And a lot of this comes out if you Google hiring practices at a lot of large companies, you'll come across the top 10 questions to ask at an interview Google. And so part of it is a perpetuation of the process that existed when you got hired. And then part of it also is that interviewing is really hard work, and these are really easy solutions. So this talk was partially born out of last year. We were interviewing for a developer, and it took me 3 months. So we're 4 people. We were 3 people back then, and I was the only software engineer on staff. And it took me 3 months to hire someone. So for 3 months, we didn't really write code, or I didn't really write code. The company didn't get any code written because my job was to actually find someone and hire someone to work with. And we wanted to do it right. We wanted to find someone that would be with us for a long term. We wanted to find someone that we actually enjoyed talking with and had some good ideas and brought in new viewpoints and new ideas and new things. So it's really, really hard work. I literally tripled the number of minutes I used on my cell phone for 2 months. I'm not a big cell phone talker, but I had over 1,000 minutes used every month on the cell phone. I made calls every day, phone screened everyone who applied to it, any sort of modicum of experience on their resume, trying to find the person that sort of worked with us and worked out with us. So a lot of times people use these sort of approaches because it's really easy. Oh, they can't answer that no traversal problem? Well, they're written off. Or oh, they don't have a GitHub profile? Well, we can't hire them. But then, I didn't really have a GitHub profile until this career, or until this position I'm actually in, because I've never worked for some place that actually let me write code for open source. And then I've got a family, I've got kids, so I don't have time to write code at home. So if your sort of checkpoint is like, oh, they've got a GitHub profile and I can see the stuff on GitHub, it's not really a good checkpoint if you're trying to hire someone who doesn't have time for that sort of stuff or doesn't have the experience to know how to use GitHub, things like that. Oh, that's not going to load, is it? That's an animation of Googling like top 10 hardest interview questions, and you literally just get these responses, and there's hundreds of them, and they're like crazy things like, tell me the number of piano tuners that are in Seattle. And that's the question. There's no other evidence, no other information given. And like the person walking through the answer is like, well, Seattle's got a population of 800,000 people, and we can assume that like a fifth of them own pianos. Like, how do you assume that? Like the answer on starts jumping to all these conclusions that like, how the hell do I know who owns a piano in Seattle? I've never grew up in a household that owned a piano. Like, I don't know anyone who owned a piano. Like, what do you, like, let's go on with this. So like, how do we fix this though? Like, this is the big problem. How do we do this? And my answer to this frequently is pair coding. So our interview process will be a general sort of phone screen. I'll call you and I'll start talking to you. Questions about what's on your resume, questions about what you find interesting, what you like doing. Is there anything about programming that actually excites you? If not, that's cool. Like, programming doesn't have to excite you. You can be good at it. You can find it really boring. And generally, every single person I talk to on the phone will lead to a pair coding exercise. So we work remote. We don't have an office or anything. I actually live in Seattle. Some of us live in the East Coast. One of us has actually been traveling there for like 3 weeks now. So we'll set up a time where I can get on like a Google Hangout. We'll do audio only. I don't want to look at you because that can be really nerve-wracking for some people. And we'll get into like JS Fiddle. JS Fiddle uses Share.js, so we can actually share a document back and forth. And we'll walk through the actual coding of a very small problem, like painting boxes in the DOM. Something that is not super elaborate. It doesn't take a lot of time, but has a good number of points where we can sort of elaborate or dive deep into details for it. And the idea of pair coding is not, I've done pair coding in a lot of interviews before where I've started to sit down and they give me a problem and they sit back and they're like, okay, now write some code. We're going to pair code. And you're like, okay, we're going to pair code, so I'm going to write. Do you have any input? No, I'm just going to watch you write. And you're like, well, that's not actual pair coding people here. So like, let's get in. So like, I'll start writing the function definition or I'll start asking questions because like, it's nerve-wracking to be in the interview. It's nerve-wracking to be on the receiving end of like, hey, write this function. No matter how small you may think the function is, like, that can be very nerve-wracking. And as a quick note, I try extraordinarily hard not to use the words like simple or easy when describing these questions because what I may find is simple after 20 years of programming experience, someone with 2 years of experience may not find easy in the slightest. Or they may have never actually used DOM methods and they only know jQuery. So the idea here is not to like shock people or prejudice people by giving them sort of painted words about how things are, but to actually walk them through an exercise with them and write the code with them. So we do some pair coding. We do examples that are relevant towards the actual position. So if I'm hiring someone for front end, we're going to talk about the DOM. We're going to talk probably about jQuery. We may not use jQuery, but like you probably should know. We're front end developers. You should probably know what jQuery is. You should understand the basics of jQuery at some point. We're talking about some CSS. I am horrible at CSS. But I still have to ask CSS questions. Like, we have to get into this. But we're going to make sure the examples are relevant to our job. I'm not going to ask someone, how to make lights light up on a Johnny 5 board, when they're going to be changing the color of a button on our website. Like, the number of times I've also, like, worked at a job and, like, my first month has been literally changing the colors of buttons. And you're like, well, what was all that JavaScript you made me do? And they, Jesus. And then no more whiteboards. I want you all to repeat this after me. I want you to say no more whiteboards right now, please. Can we do this? No more whiteboards. Awesome. Thank you. I consider that to be a pledge, by the way. I have actually walked out of interviews before where they've actually asked me to write code on a whiteboard. I've just been like, this is not a culture fit. And I understand that's a privileged position I've been in where I've already had a job that I didn't mind working and I could sit and look for another job. But you're like, no more whiteboards, please. No one writes code on a whiteboard. No one should ever have to write code on a whiteboard. They're horrible looking for drawing boxes on. And then also, let's talk about education here. So I interviewed at Google back in 2003. So as a quick background, I have an undergraduate degree in journalism from the University of Massachusetts. I took some computer science classes in high school, independent study, because hey, it was interesting and I was failing math anyway, so whatever. I'm horrible at math. I like literally failed pre-calculus and calculus 2 in college. But I have been writing code for like 15, 16 years professionally. Like, I've had a job where I get paid to write code. I got through 5 phone screens with Google, 5 of them. And then I got told I didn't have an MA and they didn't want to talk to me anymore. And I'm like, what? You wasted like 7 hours of people's lives, and then we're like, oh, you don't have a master's degree, so yeah, we're not going to do that. So like, let's try to prefer experience over education, and let's look at experience not in terms of like what's on your resume, but like what you can do, what you can talk about. One of the things that I try to find to do when I'm in a phone screen is to like sort of bullshit about really simple and simple, not simple from permission, but like, how are you doing? How's your day? To get people really comfortable into like talking, and then start asking them tech questions and start asking questions about like, not like, hey, how do you traverse a node, but like, hey, it says you've done this before. Why don't you tell me about it? What do you like about that? What didn't you like about it? You use this technology. What did you think of this technology? Did you like it? Did you find the documentation easy to use? Things like that. So it gets people more comfortable, and they're more apt to start discussing things that they know and understand, and start building a conversation with you rather than you just asking a series of questions and giving yes or no answers. And this is also not to say that education takes a backseat. There are a lot of jobs out there like that OkCupid Labs job. They were really looking for someone who had a computer science degree. I am not that person. If that is really on your hard list of requirements, by all means, use it. But don't interview people who don't have your requirements if they have it. Don't make them go through that process. So yeah, unless it is. Sorry, got ahead of myself. And then the other thing is to give people the same assessment regardless of their experience. So I've been in places where like someone has come in and interviewed, and they're Twitter famous or they're Node famous or something, and someone wants to skip the pair coding exercise with them. Problem is that it doesn't give you a really fair assessment of everyone's skill and ability. Not only that, it doesn't give you a fair assessment of how it's going to be working with them. So give everyone the same assessment regardless of their experience. Make sure everyone goes through the same process. It's the only way you're ever going to compare apples to apples. It's the only way you're ever going to make a fair decision about this. And then be honest. The most important part is be honest. With your current employees, the people who are responsible for this, agree on a minimum criteria for the position before you start. So if you decide you really want that computer science degree, decide it now before you even start bringing in resumes, before you write a job posting. Make it in the job posting, decide on it first, don't change it later. Don't discount candidates who come across poorly on paper. That's to say, like, someone doesn't have a GitHub profile link, or doesn't have experience with open source, or doesn't have X, Y, and Z, or has worked for the same corporation for 6 years and can't really talk about what they've been doing because it's like, I don't know, it's secret, or it's it's classified or something like that. Don't discount these people just because like you can't look at their code on a piece of paper. And then seek consensus when agreeing on candidates. Don't bully or horse trade with your coworkers. Don't be like, I really like this guy and I want him, and I'm going to say no to everyone else until we get him. Be honest with each other. Like really work with people. This is the decision that everyone has to live with. You don't want to hire someone and have to fire them, or like have them quit because the job sucks because they don't like working with you. That's even a bigger pain in the butt than it is hiring someone, to be honest with you. So don't bully or horse trade. And then if you're working for a large company and the answer is hire, but like I don't want to work with them, don't say hire. I don't want to work with them. It's like that team sucks, so like they can take that person. And that's kind of a crappy answer to give. So like if you don't like the person, just be honest about it. Don't be like I like them, but I just don't want to work with them. Just be like I didn't like them. Just be honest. Like really, you got to be honest about this stuff. And that's it.